I think the future of Hungary could be decided in 15-20 years by the question of Ukraine's membership in the European Union. So Hungarians rightly always like to talk about how it will be better. I think it is very important not to work for nothing, but to make it better. But sometimes you have to think that this could be worse. So what Peter said earlier, before I came in, or just then, is that we could lose what we have achieved so far. And this referendum is about that. And if someone thinks that this is a theoretical question, although Peter also said that he writes with his feet on the ground, if I paid attention back there, I was lying down. So he writes with his feet on the ground. It's not just about that, but there is a decision. I could say that there is an order in Brussels about this, which they are not hiding, since the President of the Commission, our common friend Ursula von der Leyen, announced in the European Parliament that Ukraine's accession to the EU must happen by 2030. That is less than 5 years. So this is knocking on the door. And if it happens, everything that Peter talked about the Ukrainian mafia, public security, agriculture, European Union money, we call him a hook. If someone claims that he will bring home the EU money and also supports Ukraine in European Union membership, he is obviously lying. Because if Ukraine becomes European Union member, then there will be no money to bring home. Either one or the other. Both are not possible. I tell you with all seriousness that if there is not a decisive, obvious majority of Hungarian public opinion against EU membership, against Ukraine's EU membership, then it is not certain that we will be able to defend Hungary's interests in European forums using only government power. But the hardest and biggest battle of the next 6 months will be this in the entire European Union, because the future of the European Union will be decided on this. Many questions could be asked about why others are doing it, how they are doing it, what they think, but that is irrelevant now. The point is that there is an order that has been issued, which says that Ukraine must be brought into the European Union by 2030. I'm not even saying that someday, in 20, 30, 40 years, things might turn out in such a way that Ukraine can meet the conditions required for accession and that don't destroy the Hungarian economy. I don't rule this out theoretically, but I'm quite sure that this is not in the foreseeable future of 15 years. I dare to say this all the more because the EU usually admits countries and places them in such a way in terms of votes, in terms of financial support, that their size is known, for example. But how big is Ukraine? We don't know this morning. How big was it just now? How big is Ukraine? And should people even live there? After all, financial support and many other issues are settled in the EU in proportion to the population. And let them go and live in Ukraine. Now, and what about the refugees? Will they go home or not? Or here is the debate, which I think you have been following since this morning, when the next round planned in London failed. The question is which territories now belong to Ukraine and which do not. And besides, not only do we not know how big Ukraine is or how many people live in it, we also don't know whether it will be at war in the next 4 or 5 years or not. Will there be a ceasefire? International peace treaties guaranteeing a lasting solution? Or will there be a frozen conflict? Or will there be new border flare-ups every week with smaller and larger wars? We don't know all of this. It's such a risk today. And now, of course, everyone can have their own personal opinion about Ukrainians. But I think what's interesting now is not what we personally think about Ukrainians, but rather what we think about ourselves. So regardless of what we think about the Ukrainians, the rapid accession of this country to the European Union poses a risk that I think should not be taken. Everyone is happy in Brussels. That's the situation. There are these 4 things. So the economic consequences of the Ukrainian accession, migrant Hungary, the past and bank tax defaulters, the 13th month pension blown away by the wind, and the market price for household energy must be paid. These 4 will be the immediate consequences of a Brussels-backed government or political force forming a government in Hungary. I recommend these 4 dangers to everyone. But one thing is certain, Europe will never have an interest in participating in a war against Russia alongside Ukraine. I cannot imagine that. Participating in a war against Russia alongside Ukraine means that we ourselves become the instruments and subjects of destruction and destruction. Because if a war like the one that broke out now, which the Russians started, breaks out, there is only one sensible European behavior that can be morally, politically, and economically undertaken, which is to isolate the conflict as small as possible. And let's not let it spread further. Then we will not jump on the side of the Ukrainians, as every other country in the European Union, except for us and the Vatican, has done. By siding with Ukraine and seeing itself as a husband at war, instead of saying that here is a war between two Slavic peoples, a war of one flesh. This is a big problem. This could be an even bigger problem. And let's do everything in our power to isolate the conflict. Both in terms of territory and intensity, it should be as small as possible. We also proposed this, right from the very first moments. You may still remember the 2022 election campaign, when we kind of talked about this, and we said that this conflict should be isolated. Now, in comparison, different countries in Europe, for different reasons, I think, it's such a colorful palette that I can't even paint it here, because we would sit here until morning, but for different reasons, jumped into this war. And they thought that they would defeat the Russians on the occasion of Ukraine, and now they should go home and say that we lost. It is far from everything and to stretch the framework of our meeting today, because in Europe, losing a war has always had extremely serious consequences. You cannot just get away with it. And here, after all, it is not Ukraine that has suffered, but the entire European Union. We are in a losing war. Even we pulled ourselves out of it, but the European Union lost this war. Well, let's say the Americans lost too. They were just lucky that a new president came in and said that this is not America's war. This is the Biden administration's war. They jumped in, they lost too, we're putting an end to this now. Because America was not interested in war, but in peace, then they came out of it. And the Western Europeans are still in it, because those who brought Europe into this war should admit the loss of the war and draw its conclusions. So we are responsible for the fact that so many people died. We introduced sanctions against the Russians, which hurt us at least as much as they did. Prices went up here, inflation, energy, everything. The whole European economy collapsed. Why? For a lost war. Now we can moralize about who, where, and to what extent was right or wrong. But politics is not about that. It's about the fact that there is a problem. And let's try to find a solution to eliminate this problem as soon as possible. And the implication of the problem should be as small as possible, and we try to somehow turn the bad thing into something at least neutral or good. That's why we are held. That's why there are politicians. Not because he's no longer in office, but I can say politely, like the German lady who was foreign minister, to the greater glory of Germany, that he doesn't negotiate. So what do we need a foreign minister for? Well, since he doesn't negotiate, diplomacy doesn't exist here. How could it be? There is no communication and no diplomacy only in wars where the parties want to write each other off. There is no need for that. But in any other case, we know that the war will end someday. The sooner the better. That's something that needs to be discussed in advance. So, the fact that I am not negotiating, and we, the European Union, for 2 years, but now almost 3 years, have had our pants kicked in the ass every time we dared to say that we need to negotiate, communicate, and try to close the matter, or that there needs to be a ceasefire. Ceasefire, peace, these were the most punishable expressions in the Prime Minister's sliding meetings. They just didn't get knocked to the ground. They were such idiots. They screamed in a way that you can't imagine when I said peace and a ceasefire. In Europe, we have 2 world wars behind us.